Angela, well, thank you very much for coming today. I'd really appreciate having a conversation about leadership in the banks. Obviously, I come at it from a research point of view and you very much from a practitioner point of view. I suppose I'd like to start really with the big question about to what extent you attribute the crisis in banking to the dominance of men at the top of banking boards.
Well, I think perhaps the first thing to say is don't forget it was the few banks that failed, not the many.
Yes.
The largest majority of banks, both here and elsewhere in the world, survived what was the freezing of the financial system very well.
Yes.
Those that did get into trouble, they got into trouble pretty spectacularly, and for very similar reasons of lending too much money at the wrong price to the wrong people. Basic, simple problems.
Yes.
To try and attribute something as interconnected and as complicated as a financial system freezing and as failure to one particular fault, I'm afraid, or one particular issue, I'm afraid, no, that's too simplistic.
That would be a bit too...
It would,
yes.
it would. But I think it is at the same time a fair point to say that there was a certain amount of received assumptions, now known as groupthink.
Yes.
But that was groupthink, if you like, yes, in the banking sector. And on some boards, groupthink though on financial regulators, groupthink on central banks, groupthink in governments. So again, you know, fairly wide and sweeping were some of the reasons.
Yes, and I noticed, because of course we do the female FTSE report each year, that the 2 years following the crisis, actually the percentage of women on the big banking boards actually went down from 12% to 8%. So it seemed like they almost went backwards instead of forwards.
And now it's coming back up again.
But you're quite right. I think it's coming back up now. I mean, I see Barclays and RBS have got.
That's right. RBS has, I think, been particularly strong in recruiting women. But part of the reason for that, I don't think you can say, is in any way about women. It was, though, about significant change. Because self-evidently, when you have the sort of difficulties that we had, when you had the sort of failures that we had, it wasn't just a question of one person, and it wasn't just a question of making one change. And so there's a whole set of changes that went right through the organisations, most of which, of course, are completely not visible.
Yes.
But what part of those changes were changes at board level.
Yes.
And completely understandable. So it doesn't surprise me that you had a change which could have resulted in there being fewer women. I think the big question is, what does a steady state look like? You know, what is normal?
Yes.
And I think most of us would say normal is that you do reflect around your board, you know, the mixture of sexes, just as you reflect in the country. There's more than one sex in the country.
Yes. But perhaps, I mean, from being a proponent of diversity on board, you underestimate, I think, the importance of having a diversity on the board, not just in terms of gender, geography, nationality, ethnicity. I mean, all the research on looking at women's participation on boards does seem to indicate that they bring better governance, better risk management, because I think women often are prepared to ask the awkward questions or the questions clarifying what's going on. I mean, you sit on lots of boards. What's your experience?
Yes, I think it's very interesting, your research, you see, because as you rightly say, sort of I'm there and do things, and I haven't sort of sat back and read the research, and so to hear you talk about it, I think gives a very interesting reflection. And to say, you know, do women approach and discuss at a board table differently to men? The answer is yes, often they do. You can get more penetrating questions. You can actually get questions.
Yes.
And that sort of mixed dynamic is, I think, vital.
Yes.
A lot of that, though, takes its tone from the chairman.
Yes.
And has the chairman put in place both a structure and a type of operation that means that people feel that they can get engaged.
Yes.
And in the end, you know, you do have to look to see what that chairman is doing. And I use the word chairman as a word, not necessarily to denote.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, we've worked with some wonderful chairmen who are extremely inclusive and very, very good. But let me ask you another follow-up question about your experience on a board, because research shows that if you're one woman, you're just seen as the token woman. If there's two, there's a great tendency to pit one against the other. But it's having that critical mass of 3 or more where you are now seen beyond being a woman to actually being another director on the board. And I just wonder if the research plays itself out in your experience of being on a board.
Well, so far I've never been on a board where there's been 3 of us,
right.
So I look forward to that. The life I've led, the working life I've led, means that often I have been one of either very few women or the only woman. And to a certain extent, I don't get looked on so much as a female, as being, you know, somebody's sister or aunt or whatever, you know, sort of kind of more, it's a bit sexless, which can be quite convenient from this, for this purpose. I don't know that I've ever been considered to be a token woman, but sometimes it can be difficult if you're the one who's got one view and everybody else has got another, or if you're the one who's prepared to challenge what appears to be a received view, which is why I go back to the point I made earlier. You know, does that board have a culture which thinks it's perfectly normal for everybody to share views and to have a different view, to be overridden and that's all right, or the minority view to be considered perhaps the better view and that's all right? Or do you have a one which is too formalised and then people feel that they somehow they can't, or it's awkward just to be different? And so a lot of it starts in a slightly different place. And if you get that right sort of action and interaction around the board, then some of the other things, male, female, tend to really, that's right. You know, the balance sort of follows, and it ceases to become a real issue.
Yes. No, you're right, and I think, as you say, the tone very much comes from the chairman, and I think that's very important. One last question. I mean, obviously, I'm very keen to increase the number of women on boards, and since the banking crisis, there's been really a renewed emphasis on women and men sitting on any board, that of course that they pass this sort of FSA test. I wonder what your views were on that, because, you know, surely it was having all this banking and financial expertise that, you know, was part of the problem in the first place. Do you think this is necessary? Yes,
I do actually, because we were really operating not just in banking, but right across the FTSEs under a different type of code of corporate governance that had been brought in, which talked about the need for diversity on boards and also for independence. And the way that that had been articulated and brought into being was one in which you had a very broad range of different experiences around a board. Now, of course, in one respect, that's good, but in some industries, you know, it's so technical, or it can be so complicated that really what you do need is you need people who actually understand what that business, what that industry is all about. And what we're seeing across the banking industry now is more people with banking and financial services industry experience at non-executive director level on the boards. So it's gone in a different way.
Yes, but I mean, what concerns me is in the last 6-month monitoring report we did for Lord Davis just recently, it was very nice. There's been 36 women appointed to FTSE 100 boards, of which actually 2/3 are brand new women to FTSE 350 boards, which is very encouraging. So that's the good news. But the bad news from my point of view, or I'm going to ask you if it's bad, 2/3 of them are from banking and financial backgrounds. So I hope that we're not excluding them.
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. No, I didn't know that. I think, though, that we are starting to see more women come forward, and those sorts of encouragements. And if there's encouragement elsewhere, encouragement from your family, encouragement for the headhunters, or I suppose to call them search agencies or whatever, you know, as well as open-mindedness from nomination committees and so forth, then I think we will see more women coming through. Probably the big question mark I do have, and it's your earlier point, and that is the very intensive interviews you now have to pass in order, with the Financial Services Authority, in order to be appointed to a board of a major financial company. And that is proving to be a deterrent. And people are looking at that and thinking, no, I don't have to do that. And after all, in banking, of course, you're also in the very aggressive spotlight of being a bad boy anyway, regardless. So if you have a choice, then you may choose elsewhere. And what we've got is a world-class financial services industry here in the UK. And we do need to be careful that all the actions that are taken are right actions, and that we don't get too close into, you know, that sort of almost witch hunt era, because then we will not only diminish something which is a great thing for the
yes.
UK, but we'll also reduce dramatically the people who are prepared to come forward and put themselves up to serve on their boards.
Yes.